One of the questions that's always on my mind is, how do we desecularize Muslims? How do we get Muslims to understand their Islam as it was, as they once did? And it's not an easy question. From whence does secularism flow? There are the usual suspects, right? There are the so-called Islamic authorities who transmit a secularized version of Islam, whether they do so intentionally or not. And I made a video talking about those. There are the governments and intelligence agencies that seek to kind of create a Christian-like reform in Islam, to transform what Islam means for Muslims so that the Ummah is kept weak. The Muslim world cannot rival the West on the global stage, and Muslims become assimilated into Western lifestyles and ideologies. And definitely there's more videos to make in that domain. But what I wanted to make this video about is the soft power of secular Islam. The soft power. i.e., what is it that makes secular Islam so appealing? And I mean, that's a hypothesis. That secular Islam is appealing, but I think after I explain from where its appeal comes from, you'll come to agree with me that yes, it does have a certain appeal, especially to many Western Muslims. But before we proceed, we should, even though we've discussed it many times on this channel before, we should define what do I mean by secular Islam. Of course, secular Islam is not Islam at all. The fastest way to explain it is that secular Islam totally subverts the idea that God is the unique legislator. Secular Islam reformulates the entire narrative of Islam to be between an individual and God. And it becomes kind of on an opt-in, opt-out basis, whether or not you want to follow the rituals, whether or not you want to follow the rules, and it becomes segregated from public life, law, society, economics, how we choose our leaders, etc. Right? To think that your religion is your allegiance, for instance, your political allegiance, this is, of course, an anti-secular idea. So someone who kind of, let's say, adheres to secular Islam, might adhere to these rituals even religiously. They might outwardly be a very practicing Muslim, but at the same time they're okay with. They tolerate the current status quo, whereby secular law dominates the world, whereby men are taken as legislators, and this is somehow okay, this is somehow normal. Of course, that goes against the very kalima of Tawheed. Tawheed asserts that God is the sole legislator, and man has no share in this task. So, secular Islam, of course, not being Islam at all, what is its appeal to a Western Muslim? Let's count the ways that secular Islam can appeal to people. The first one is that secular Islam is much more convenient, because you see, if we reduce the scope of Islam to just rituals and mores, then there's less things that Islam comes to turn your life upside down on. There's less things that Islam comes to tell you that, no, things can't be like this, things must be like that, and therefore you must accommodate your life to do those things, right? At the most basic level, for those who are very secularized and only understand Islam as rituals, and they've even excluded some of, let's say, for example, Islamic contract law, and Islamic law when it comes to businesses and making money. Of course, us existing in a capitalist society, existing in an economy which has not been built according to Islamic principles, it's very difficult to conduct yourself in a business setting according to Islam, according to the Sharia, according to what is halal, what is haram. Therefore, if you adopt, the more you narrow the scope of what Islam talks about, the more you can go with the flow of a non-Islamic society. I mean, that's pretty common sense. If you adopt Islam properly, then you understand that Islam's mission is to be established in the world. You understand that this status quo of secular law cannot be tolerated. And once you understand that, then really you have a social Islamic responsibility to be part of that revival, to be part of that change. So you can't just be, just some individual adhering to a Western lifestyle with some Islamic characteristics sprinkled in. You really have to, upturn your life, overturn your life. I don't know if that's the right word. You have to kind of reform your entire life around this idea that we have to carry Islam because Islam is not there. Islam is not established. Another reason why secular Islam is so appealing is that it lets you fit in. And I remember this. I can speak to this one personally. I think the first time I heard what secularism was, or the word secular, I probably was in elementary school. And when I heard the word the first time and what it meant, I actually got excited because I went to public school. I went to school with non-Muslims. So even though I had a solid Islamic upbringing, it was very difficult for me to fit in with the other kids, for me to exist in that school without having to tell the teachers, I have to pray at this time, or I'm not allowed to do this activity, or I can't be with this group of people, whatever it is, right? Like just living in a society, living in a system, living in just a school, which is not based on Islamic principles, is going to clash with Islam in thousands of places. So once you accept the idea of secular, that when you're with when you're in public, when you're with the rest of society, then you're not there as a Muslim. You're there just as a Canadian or as a Brit or as an American. And your Islam is really something private. It's really something that's between you and maybe your co-religionists, and definitely between you and God, right? So secular Islam allows for Muslims to belong in the West, to belong with non-Muslims. It creates a mechanism, or let's say it accommodates belongingness to the West, and that's a very strong emotion that most of us felt, especially those of us who are born and raised here, is that we want to belong. It's a natural human psychology, to want to belong with the rest of the people that you live with. Alienation is very taxing on a person. It's not in a person's nature. So in order to kind of get around that, in order to kind of stay a Muslim and yet somehow belong with kuffar, secular Islam seems to offer the solution. You stay a Muslim. You pray, you fast, you make your dua, you build a relationship with Allah. But when you're with others, when it comes to the election season, when it comes to the politics of the country, you don't talk about the politics, from your Islamic perspective. You just come in and you talk about things the same way they speak about it from a secular perspective. When you talk about the rules of a business or the rules of a school, again, you reason these things from a secular perspective, just as your colleagues do, who are non-Muslim, right? And that facilitates your belongingness. Like you start to feel like anybody else, and they start to feel like you're one of them. Even though you're a Muslim, you belong with us, right? And the last reason, secular Islam, and this one's a little bit similar to reason number two. It lets Muslims keep a Western liberal morality. So reason number two is about social belongingness. Reason number three is more internal to a person. Us being raised in the West and in the 21st century and in this specific social political climate, we've accumulated certain biases, moral biases. We see right and wrong from a specific perspective, which is a product of our time and place. For that reason, Islam, real Islam, is going to clash with these biases which really come from a liberal perspective in thousands of places, right? Every Muslim who was raised in the West and actually was taught Islam properly and tried to hold on to their Islam can recount instances of things that they heard the first time they started hearing things in Islam that were like, oh my God, how can Islam have this? How can Islam say that? How can, the Prophet ﷺ spoke about women like this, or whatever it is, right? People have had these experiences. And there's two ways that you can come out of those experiences. Well, there's more than two ways, but I'm going to talk about two. One is that you stay firm, you go through the pain, and you come out the other end adjusting your biases, not your Islam. Your Islam stays solid, and you let Islam transform you. The other way is the opposite. Your biases stay the same. You hold on to your biases. You think that your biases are important or somehow inform morality some way, and you cannot stomach the Islamic reality. And so you do the opposite. You let your biases transform how you understand your Islam. So how does this relate to secular Islam? Well, the proper Islam, which is political, is not very politically correct, right? Sharia law is the thing that scares like lots of people about Islam, right? It's like that scare word, Sharia law. Many aspects of the law of Islam are things that are not seen by modern society to be palatable or just or moral. Even though, like, what does modern society know about what is just or normal or good? Modern society changes their definition of good every 10 years. But nevertheless, the biases remain. So if you adopt a secular Islam, which really just kind of keeps Islam to those things that are consistent with Western liberalism, because secular liberalism does not have a problem with you believing in God and worshiping God and going to the masjid. Actually, that's part of secularism, is that people have their own personal faiths and beliefs and so forth. It is only when your belief in God is actually substantive, so as not to be only a personal relationship between you and Him, but rather you believe that God should be the king over society. You believe that God's laws that He revealed are still relevant today as they were back then. Only then, now do you actually clash with liberal morality. So when you adopt secular Islam, you avoid an intellectual ideological confrontation. You get to have a liberal moral compass and be a Muslim at the same time, right? And that just does not go together. But that's what secular Islam offers, right? This is what secular Islam offers, and we have to understand its appeal from that perspective. So my camera died, unfortunately, short battery life, but I finished what I wanted to say pretty much in recounting those three reasons why secularism does unfortunately have an appeal for Muslims, and especially Western Muslims today. And we still do want to discuss how do we counteract these sources of secularism's appeal. How do we create an appeal for principled Islam? How do we make Muslims feel like they don't need secular Islam, and in fact, all of those reasons that I mentioned for its appeal are really just a mirage. So we'll tackle that in future videos, inshallah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.